On the morning of June 5th, 1893, in a crowded courthouse in New Bedford, Massachusetts, a 32-year-old woman from a respectable family sat down to be tried for the axe murders of her own father and stepmother. Her name was Lizzie Andrew Borden. She taught Sunday school. She belonged to the church, to the charitable societies, to the comfortable world of a New England mill town. And on a hot August morning the year before, someone had walked through her family's house and struck her father and her stepmother more than 24 times with a hatchet. There were no witnesses. There was no confession. There was no murder weapon that anyone could prove. What there was a daughter who had been in the house and a country that could not decide whether it was looking at a victim or a monster. This is the trial of Lizzie Borden. To understand the trial, you have to understand the house on 2nd Street in Fall River, Massachusetts, and the cold, unhappy family that lived inside it. Andrew Borden was one of the wealthiest men in Fall River. He owned property, banks, and mills. But Andrew was also famously, relentlessly frugal. For all his money, the family lived in a cramped house with no indoor bathroom and no electric light in an unfashionable part of town. Living in that house were Andrew, his second wife, Abby, the stepmother, his 2 adult daughters from his first marriage, Emma and Lizzie, and a young Irish housemaid, Bridget Sullivan. And the household was not a happy one. Lizzie and Emma, both unmarried and in their 30s, had a strained, resentful relationship with their stepmother. The resentment was partly about money and property. A few years before the murders, Andrew had given a piece of real estate to Abby's side of the family. The daughters were furious. After that, the family barely ate together. Lizzie had stopped calling Abby her mother. In the days before the killings, the tension had grown worse. The whole household, including Bridget, had been violently ill, and Andrew had quarreled with someone at the door.
It was not a warm house, sir, and I will not pretend it was. The family kept to their own rooms. The daughters and the missus did not take their meals together at the end, but I never once heard talk of harm. It was a cold house. It was not, to my knowing, a violent one.
On the morning of August 4th, 1892, it was already brutally hot in Fall River. Andrew Borden left the house to attend to business in town. His older daughter, Emma, was away visiting friends in a nearby town. Inside the house were 3 people: Abby Borden, Lizzie Borden, and the maid, Bridget Sullivan. Sometime that morning, in an upstairs guest room, Abby Borden was attacked. She was struck from behind with a hatchet again and again, roughly 19 blows. And she fell dead between the bed and the wall. The medical evidence would later show something chilling. Abby had died perhaps an hour and a half before her husband, which meant that for 90 minutes, her body lay in an upstairs room of a small occupied house. And the prosecution would argue no one in that house noticed or said a word. At around 10:45 in the morning, Andrew Borden returned home. He was let in, lay down on a sofa in the sitting room to rest in the heat. And there, within minutes, he was killed. The same way, someone struck Andrew Borden in the face and head, roughly 11 times, with a hatchet as he lay, sleeping. Then, a short time later, Lizzie Borden called out for the maid.
Maggie, come down quick. Father is dead. Somebody has come in and killed him.
Lizzie called the maid by the name Maggie, a name the Borden family used for whichever Irish girl they employed. Bridget rushed downstairs. Neighbors and a doctor were summoned, and only later, when someone went upstairs, was the body of Abby Borden discovered in the guest room, where by then she had lain dead for hours. Suspicion fell on Lizzie almost at once, and it fell on her for reasons that were partly evidence and partly something darker. The evidence against Lizzie was a collection of unsettling pieces. She had been the person in the house with the bodies. Her accounts of where she had been that morning seemed to shift. At one point, she said she had been in the barn loft, eating pears in the worst heat of the day in a stifling loft that investigators found thick with undisturbed dust. There was more. A few days after the murders, Lizzie was seen burning a dress in the kitchen stove. She said it was stained with paint. And before the killings, a druggist would testify Lizzie had tried to buy prussic acid, a deadly poison, supposedly to clean a fur garment. But there were also powerful reasons to doubt her guilt. No blood was ever found on Lizzie, not on her skin, not on her hair. The murders were savage, close-range hatchet attacks. They should have drenched the killer in blood. And in the few minutes available to her, Lizzie had no realistic way to clean herself, hide a weapon, and burn blood-stained clothing. The case went first to an inquest, and here the law itself would later split the trial open. At the inquest, Lizzie was questioned for days without a lawyer present, and some argued while under the influence of morphine prescribed by her doctor for her nerves. Her inquest testimony was confused, contradictory, and damaging. Lizzie Borden was arrested and charged with murder. The trial opened in June 1893 in New Bedford before a panel of 3 justices of the Massachusetts Superior Court. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Hosea Knowlton, and Knowlton is one of the most interesting figures in this entire story because the surviving record suggests he prosecuted the case with real private reluctance. He had written before the trial of his genuine doubts, but the grand jury had indicted Lizzie and the public demanded a trial. Knowlton would do his duty without ever quite silencing his own unease. The defense was led by George Robinson, a former governor of Massachusetts. Robinson was warm, folksy, grandfatherly, and extremely shrewd, and he had one more advantage, that the law today would never permit one of the 3 justices on the bench. Justice Justin Dewey had been appointed to his judgeship years earlier by Governor Robinson himself. The single most important legal fight of the entire trial happened early, and it happened over a question of evidence. The prosecution desperately wanted to read Lizzie's inquest testimony into the trial record. That testimony was full of contradictions. If the jury heard it, it would be devastating. The defense moved to block it entirely. The defense argument was a constitutional one. At the inquest, Lizzie had effectively been the prime suspect. She had been questioned without a lawyer at her side. She had not been clearly warned that her words could be used to hang her, to then use that testimony against her at trial. The defense argued would violate her right not to be compelled to be a witness against herself.
Your honors, when this woman sat in that inquest room, she was not a free witness. She was, in all but name, a prisoner. She was alone. She had no counsel. She was unwell to take the words wrung out of her in that condition and lay them before this jury. That is not evidence, your honors. That is a trap dressed up as a transcript.
District Attorney Knowlton argued back that Lizzie had not been formally under arrest at the inquest and that her statements had been, in a legal sense, voluntary. It was a genuine, difficult legal question, and the three justices retired to decide it. Their ruling decided the trial. The justices held that Lizzie's inquest testimony was not admissible. The jury would never hear it. The single most damaging body of evidence against Lizzie Borden was sealed away before the jury heard one word of it.
The court has considered the question with care. The statements of the prisoner at the inquest were made while she was, in substance, held under suspicion and without the aid of counsel. They were not, in the judgment of this court, given with that freedom which the law requires. They are excluded.
The inquest ruling was the first great blow to the prosecution. It was not the last. Consider the murder weapon. Police searching the Borden cellar had found several hatchets and axes. One of them, a hatchet head with a broken off handle, coated in ash and dust, became the prosecution's leading candidate. But the prosecution could never prove it was the weapon. There was no blood on it. That could be tied to the killings. Its connection to the crime remained a theory, and the jury could see that it was only a theory. Then came the prussic acid. The prosecution wanted to call the druggist, who said Lizzie had tried to buy poison the day before the murders. It was powerful evidence of a planning mind. The defense objected, and the justices ruled that the poison testimony was too remote from an axe murder and excluded it. The jury never heard about the prussic acid at all. One more piece was kept from the jury, and it was the most macabre of all. At the inquest stage, the actual skulls of Andrew and Abby Borden had been used as evidence. When prosecutors brought the skulls into the courtroom, Lizzie reportedly fainted. The defense fought over how such grim physical evidence could be used piece by piece. The prosecution's case was being narrowed and narrowed, and then the defense turned the maid, Bridget Sullivan, from a prosecution witness into something close to a defense witness. Bridget had been in the house all morning. The prosecution needed her to place Lizzie near the crimes, but under careful questioning, Bridget's testimony mostly helped Lizzie. Bridget said she had heard no screams, no struggle, no quarrel. She described an ordinary, if miserable, morning.
I was washing the windows, sir, inside and out the most of that morning. I heard no outcry from the house. I heard no blow. When Miss Lizzie called me down She seemed frightened. Sir, I saw no blood upon her. I saw nothing upon her dress at all.
And there was the hole in the heart of the case. 2 human beings had been hacked to death. The killer would have been spattered with blood. And the one other adult in that small house had heard nothing and had seen no blood on Lizzie at all.
We searched that house, top to bottom. We searched it more than once. We took up the cellar. We examined the clothing, and I will tell the court plainly, we did not find a weapon we could swear to, and we did not find the bloody garment that such a crime would surely have made.
Through the entire trial, the central figure sat almost motionless and almost unreadable. Lizzie Borden did not testify at her own trial in 1893 Massachusetts. That was her, right? And her lawyers used it. They had already kept her damaging inquest words out of the case. The last thing they wanted was to put her live under oath in front of Knowlton. So the jury was left to read her from a distance, and the public could not agree on what they saw. To some, Lizzie's stillness was the calm of an innocent woman wrongly accused. To others, that same stillness was something cold, a chilling, unnatural composure in a daughter whose father had just been hacked apart. But here, too, the defense understood the audience. Robinson knew that the all-male jury of New England farmers and tradesmen held a deep cultural belief, a belief that a respectable, church-going, middle-class Christian woman simply could not commit such a crime. Robinson did not fight that belief. He leaned his whole defense against it.
Gentlemen of the jury, look at her. To find this defendant guilty, you must believe that this woman, this gently raised Sunday school teaching daughter, took up a hatchet and with her own hands butchered her father in his sleep. Does she look it? Does she seem it? The Commonwealth asks you to imagine a monster, and then it asks you to find that monster in the face of a daughter.
District Attorney Knowlton gave a closing argument that observers found strangely honest about its own difficulty. He did not pretend the case was simple. He told the jury, in effect, that respectability was not the same thing as innocence, that terrible crimes are sometimes committed by people no one wants to suspect.
I am not here, gentlemen, to enjoy this. No, man could, but the law does not give us leave to look away from a hard truth, because the truth wears a respectable dress. You have been asked to acquit her because of who she is. I ask you only to weigh what she did and where she was and what she could not explain.
On the final day, one of the 3 justices, Justice Justin Dewey, the judge once appointed by defense attorney Robinson, delivered the court's charge to the jury, and legal observers then and ever since have called that charge remarkably favorable to the defense. Some have described it as sounding less like a neutral instruction and more like a closing argument for Lizzie Borden. The case went to the jury on June 20th, 1893. 12 men of southeastern Massachusetts retired to decide whether Lizzie Borden would live or hang. They did not deliberate for long. By many accounts, the jury reached its decision in roughly an hour and a half, and some jurors later said the true verdict had been settled within minutes, and that the rest of the time was spent simply sitting. So as not to seem hasty, the jury filed back into the courtroom. Lizzie Borden rose to face them.
Gentlemen of the jury, have you agreed upon a verdict?
The foreman stood, and it is reported that he was so eager to deliver the word that he spoke it before the clerk had even finished the formal question.
Not guilty.
Not guilty. On both counts, the courtroom erupted. Spectators cheered and wept. By the accounts of the day, the applause was so loud and so sustained that it spilled out of the courthouse and into the streets. Lizzie Borden sank into her chair and, for once, wept openly. Reaction across the country was deeply divided. Many believed an innocent woman had been saved from a monstrous wrong. Many others believed that a guilty woman had walked free, saved less by the evidence than by her social class, her gender, and the simple refusal of 12 men to imagine her with a hatchet. Lizzie Borden was acquitted, but she was never, in the eyes of the public, truly cleared. With her acquittal, Lizzie and her sister, Emma, inherited their father's considerable fortune. Lizzie bought a large, comfortable house in a fashionable part of Fall River, the kind of house her frugal father had never let the family have. She gave it a name, but the town did not forgive her. Old friends crossed the street. The church grew distant. For the rest of her life, children would chant a grim little rhyme about her in the street. No one else was ever charged with the murders of Andrew and Abby Borden. The case was never solved in any other direction. Officially, in the eyes of the law, it remains an unsolved double murder. And Lizzie Borden, in the eyes of the law, remains an innocent woman. Legal scholars still study the trial, not because the verdict was clearly wrong, but because of what it shows. The prosecution genuinely could not place a weapon in Lizzie's hand, could not put blood on her clothes, and could not produce a witness. The defense, meanwhile, had the inquest testimony excluded, the poison evidence excluded, a friendly judge on the panel, and a jury culturally unwilling to convict. The acquittal may well have been the legally correct result, and it is still impossible to know for certain what was true. Lizzie Borden lived another 34 years in that house on the hill, increasingly alone. Her sister, Emma, eventually moved out, and the two women never reconciled. Lizzie died in 1927 at the age of 66. She left much of her fortune to charity, including a fund for the care of animals. The trial of Lizzie Borden is remembered as a true crime puzzle. The spinster, the axe, the unanswered question. But its real lesson is about a courtroom, a court that, ruling by ruling, held the prosecution to its proof, excluding a confession like transcript, excluding a poison purchase. excluding what it could not cleanly prove. And in the end, it left a verdict that satisfied the law and satisfied almost no one's certainty. If you want to come with us to other courtrooms, to the trial of Joan of Arc, to the Salem witch trials, to a Los Angeles courtroom where a glove would not fit, subscribe to the highest court, because a verdict of not guilty is not always the same thing as the truth, and a fair trial is honest enough to admit it